Good evening. A very warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us for this webinar on the next steps for repairing the B4069 Lyneham Banks. My name is David Perrett, and I'm part of the communications team here at Wiltshire Council. I'm joined here today by Councillor Caroline Thomas, Cabinet Member for Transport, Steve Wilson and Jack Francis from Wiltshire Council, and also by Chris Cox, who works for Atkins. Before we start, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to how this webinar will work, and then we'll get straight on with the session. If you wish to see closed captions of speakers' words, then please click on the CC button on the bottom right of the screen, and they should then appear after 30 seconds or so. The system sometimes takes a little while to get warmed up. If you're having any technical problems, the most common solution is to switch it off and switch it on again. So please close Teams or your browser, reopen it, and click on the meeting link again that was sent through earlier. Other problems may be down to your home internet connection. If you're hearing an echo, it may be that you have this event open in 2 or more screens. You're welcome to submit a question to be answered using the chat function, and if you do so, please also leave your name. Our presenters will verbally answer as many questions as they're able to this evening. Many of you also submitted questions before the event, and we will also aim to answer as many of these as we can today. You should be able to see slides on your screen, and over on the other side, you should be able to see the Q&A panel. For some of you, it may be beneath the screen and you'll need to scroll down to see it. You may need to click on the icon of 2 overlapping speech bubbles to open this panel. We will also use this panel to make any announcements. Finally, I just need to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be uploaded to YouTube after the event. However, the only faces and voices that will be seen and heard in the video will be those of the presenters. Anyone attending the webinar won't be seen or heard, though their questions may be read out. I'll now hand you over to Councillor Caroline Thomas, Cabinet Member for Transport, to introduce the webinar.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the proposed repairs to the B4069 at Lyneham Banks. I really appreciate you taking the time to come online to hear about the work that's been undertaken, and would also like to thank officers for all their efforts on what is undoubtedly a very challenging project. As you are aware, because of the landslip in February last year, the B4069 was substantially damaged. We recognise the significant impact that the temporary closure is having on residents, businesses and the local community, and the difficulties it has been causing you all. Your patience is really much appreciated, and I do hope that you find this evening's webinar informative as we set out the future for the project to hopefully resolve the issues you're currently facing. Our officers and specialist consultants have given particularly careful consideration to the safety implications of the landslip. I don't think you'd expect anything else. And you'll certainly hear more about this and the options to repair it shortly. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Steve Wilson to take you through the presentation on the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Wilson. I work for the Major Highways Project Office in Wiltshire Council. I'm joined today by Chris Cox from Atkins and Jack Francis, also from Wiltshire Council. Chris, I wonder if you would mind briefly introducing yourself, please.
Hi, yes, I'm Chris Cox, an Associate Geotechnical Engineer with Atkins. I've got over 17 years of experience working on infrastructure geotechnics projects.
Fantastic. And Jack, if you could do the same, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Francis. I'm a highway project engineer working for Wiltshire Council.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got quite a full agenda this evening. We're going to focus the majority of our presentation on the fairly technical aspects of the ground investigations work that we've been doing, and also the development of potential solutions, the options assessments works. But before that, we'd like to give you a little bit of a background to the situation and also talk about the traffic management and access arrangements. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to look towards the future and what our next steps may be on this particular project. And obviously, we'd like to ensure that everybody is kept informed. So we do have a slide towards the end, specifically in connection with communications. I'm hoping that this evening's session will take around about 40 minutes to go through the presentation. So fingers crossed, we should have a good opportunity for questions and answers towards the end. So first of all, a little bit about the background. The landslide at Lyneham Banks, it happened February last year, February 22, I'm sure most people will be aware. The early signs that something was happening was actually some trees starting to lean over the carriageway. During early and mid-February, we had 3 named storms, Storm Dudley, Eunice and Franklin, passed across the country and over Wiltshire. Obviously, they're named storms, so they were significant events. The initial landslide progressed and started to bulge out into the road, and it got to the 17th of February when we took the decision that we had to close the road on safety grounds. But the landslide didn't stop. It kept going, it kept moving, and it actually displaced a significant amount of material through the spring and indeed through the summer months in 2022. The area started to stabilise towards the end of the summer, but by that time approximately 70 metres of the B road had been dislodged, and it's actually been transported about 25 metres downslope. But it still didn't stop there. There are still signs of movement out in the area, and I've got a slide a little bit later which provides a little bit of evidence of that. The material that's been moved and has been dislodged, it consists of 3 different sort of types of material. The first is some deposited construction waste material on the top layer. Subsequent to the landslide event, we've actually discovered that is contaminated material. We have the natural solifluction deposits in the area, which are the naturally occurring upper layers of the hillside, and indeed we've got the underlying Oxford clay. So we've got 3 different types of materials mixed in amongst the landslide itself. Couple of key bullet points there towards the bottom of this slide. We've got good access from the east and from the west to the area. Obviously, the B road is still intact, and when you get to the end of the road, you can access the side of the site. But getting to the top, to the crest of the site, where the landslide starts, and getting to the bottom of the landslide, that's very problematic, and we've got this risk of instability in the area. And as Caroline was alluding to, clearly safety is a key concern for us, not just for the workforce, but also for the public. We need to be maintaining and be mindful of safety throughout our design operations and indeed throughout the construction period. Before we get too much into the detail, I thought it would be helpful just to put up a slide which shows the geology in the area. This is an extract from the British Geological Society mapping, and I'm hoping that people, if you can follow my cursor, I'm hoping that people will be able to recognise this sort of S shape which comes down through the middle of the image. This is actually the B road, which is finding its way up from Dauncey Lock on the left hand side of the image to Lyneham on the right. The landslide area is actually within the red oblong, the red rectangular area. And what you can see from this image, which depicts the geology of the area, is that to the south and to the upland areas, we very clearly have the light coloured indication, which is actually a limestone. Now, a limestone is a permeable material, a permeable rock. Where the landslide has actually happened, and then coming down into the valley, we have the clay formations, and clay is impermeable. When we get significant weather events and when we get rain in general, there is a tendency, as you would imagine, for water to try to get from the higher ground, which is at the bottom of this image, through the permeable rock. It then comes along the clay, which is impermeable, as it tries to find its way down into the valley. And that movement of groundwater and that underlying geology is actually quite key to the slip mechanism and indeed the situation that we see out there at the moment. A little bit of a timeline of events. Top left-hand corner, you can see the image there on the 17th of February. That was the day that we actually closed the road, and you can see, I think, potentially you can just see the slight buckling of the carriageway there on the right-hand side. You can see in these first 2 or 3 images how very rapidly throughout February and then into March, the road distorted, it broke up, and then it started to slide down the hillside. All 4 of those images have been taken by a person holding a camera or a phone. When we got to the end of March, really the situation became so difficult that we weren't able to safely access the site. So we actually resorted to drone footage in order to undertake our monitoring works. And you'll see there through March into May, June, and then into October, how the landslide progressed. If I choose this image in particular, the alignment of the old carriageway is approximately here. And you can see how the road has been significantly dislodged and displaced about 25 metres downslope. It was only towards the end of summer that the landslide actually started to stabilise, and it became reasonably stable, reasonably enough that we could actually access the site again. And at that stage, we rapidly moved to bring forward the ground investigation works. An image just to show the current situation. Again, this is the B road coming from Dauncey Lock to the left down to Lyneham to the right, and just so people can orientate themselves, this is the Motorholic site. The landslide itself is within or approximately within this red circular area. That's about 100 metres in diameter, so that is a significant area. And the block of land or the landslide material that's moved, we believe, is between 2 and 4 metres deep. So it is a significant amount of material that has come down the hillside. The white dotted lines on this image are also important because they indicate the highway boundary. Now that means that the area of land between the white dotted lines, that's the area of land that Wiltshire controls and has access to. As highway authority, but the landslide clearly is not contained wholly within the highway. It does cover significant parts of privately owned land either side. I mentioned earlier that there is recent evidence that the land is still mobile in that area. In January of this year, we were alerted to a totally separate incident, which is at the rear of the Motorholic site, where you can see actually part of the hillside there has been displaced. I think that's about 0.5 metre or so drop in elevation. So although this is totally unrelated to the main landslide event itself from February last year, this does indicate that the area is very susceptible to land movements. I think we're now going to come on to a little bit of information about traffic management, and I think, Jack, you're going to take us through the next few slides. Yes,
thank you very much, Steve. Yes, good evening again, everybody. I just want to have a chat around the traffic management and access implications of this closure. The B4069 is a well-used route. Before the closure, it was taking approximately 5,500 vehicles per day. So clearly the challenges, even for a temporary closure of this road, are challenging. When you consider this is now a long-term closure, there's a number of factors we've had to consider whilst planning what we're going to do with the surrounding network and also the larger diversion route. So I'd like to start by looking at the diversion route, which is shown on the screen there. So this is the official diversion route that has been put in place for this closure. This closure was quickly implemented after the closure of the B4069 on the 17th of February and has remained the official closure diversion route for the entire closure. It was originally signed with temporary signage, A-frames, as you've probably seen, like many other closures are. We've since supplemented that with a number of semi-permanent signs around the route, which you'll probably recognise as being the black on yellow signs around that diversion route. So the diversion generally follows the A3102, the A4 and the B4069, and that is what we encourage everybody who's trying to divert around the site to keep to. Clearly, that's not always the situation. There's a number of the local population who still need to move around and won't be able to follow that diversion route. So we've had to factor that in and make a number of changes also to the local road network to help everybody continue to move around. On top of the diversion route we put in place, we've also installed a number of business open as usual signage. So we understand there are a number of traders situated on the B4069 who have been impacted by the closure. So we've tried to help them by installing a number of these signs at strategic locations to help that passing traffic understand that they can still access those businesses should they wish to. On top of the diversion routes and the business open as usual signage, we've also installed a number of temporary signage on the minor local roads, and this is generally to advise HGV traffic and diverted traffic that these roads are not suitable to be used and they should stick to the main diversion route. So we've installed these working with the local communities at key strategic points to try and stop that traffic from using the network. It's also worth mentioning that we're undertaking a number of traffic counts. We tend to undertake these traffic counts once every 3 months. And this helps us build up an understanding of the traffic volumes using these roads and also the speeds of the traffic using these roads. On top of our conversations with the local community, we're using these traffic counts to help us as we move forward, drive any decisions and changes we make to the local network. Next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what some of the changes were made to the local road network on the back of some of these traffic surveys. So in November last year, we introduced a number of traffic management changes to the area to help support the local community and also to help make people's journeys in the area a lot easier. So the key factors for these changes were a Clack Hill one-way restriction put onto the road. So at the moment, traffic can only move in a northbound direction down Clack Hill. And that restriction was put in place to help the local community, but also to help people continue to make their movements in the area. On top of this closure, the restriction, we also installed a number of 40-mile-an-hour limits on local roads that were affecting from heavy diversion traffic. And we've also introduced a number of 7.5-ton weight limits also to that same network. And that includes roads such as Trout and Bowds Lane nearby, who appear to take a lot of the diverted traffic from the B4069 that aren't using Clack Hill. Furthermore, we've installed a number of no parking restrictions on strategic junctions to help the traffic be able to manoeuvre around those areas and to help the local community. I mentioned we've undertaken a number of traffic counts. On top of this, we've been keen to consult with the local community and understand the challenges they're facing and how we can help them. So before any major changes have been made, we've undertaken those consultations with the local community to ensure that what we're proposing and what we're planning to do is going to help them. Next slide, please, Steve. So just looking forward, just looking at what we have done, and this is now looking at where we're moving forward through until the B4069 is reinstated and reopened. So we'll continue to undertake those traffic surveys approximately every 3 months. As those traffic surveys are undertaken, we update a report, which is then put onto our website, which I'll come on to further later on. So we keep monitoring that situation, and as and when changes occur, we will look at what we can do to try and alleviate some of those positions. So we're not ruling out further restrictions on the network. They will come forward as and when required, and they'll be backed up by the traffic survey information and any correspondence we're receiving from the local community. The final point I wanted to mention was around maintenance. Clearly, there is a lot of volume travelling on this local road network that wouldn't normally do so. As such, there's a number of repairs that are going to need to be taken on the local road network. So we envisage over the next couple of months that we are going to have to undertake a number of maintenance activities on the local road network. So this will unfortunately involve some further closures and traffic restrictions. So that's something we'll be looking to do over the next couple of months. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Jack. I think that was quite helpful, and the big take for me there is that we haven't simply just put some signage up and then walked away from the situation. We've actually been reacting and changing the situation as best we can as the time has passed. So yeah, a lot of activity and a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of our traffic management arrangements for the scheme. I think we're now going to come on, Chris, to the ground investigations. You've got a few slides which talk about the ground investigations we were able to do towards the latter part of last year.
Great. Thanks, Steve, and good evening again, everybody. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that's been done on the ground investigation. So what you can see on the slide in front of you now is an indication of the intrusive ground investigation works that were carried out towards the end of 2022. So this was the scope of this investigation was based on an extensive desk study, review of historical records, site walkovers, drone surveys, and the like. What you can see on screen with the blue markers, a position of exploratory locations. So this comprises of both machine excavated trial pits along with deeper boreholes. So this gives us both information on the ground, but also allows us to install monitoring equipment, which has been input and allows us to establish ground movement and groundwater levels at the site, and that monitoring is ongoing, helping us to understand the ground conditions. You can see obviously extensive coverage of the whole landslip area, including areas above and below the slope, as well also to the east and west of the landslip itself. And if next slide, Steve, please, Steve. Also during the closure of the road, the opportunity was taken to install or undertake ground investigation and install monitoring equipment in the area to the west of the landslip. So this is in an area where there's been historical cracking and pavement issues, which have been patch repaired in places. So this has been done such that following the reopening of the road, Wiltshire can monitor these areas more closely. In addition to the area to the west, also to the east of the landslip itself, recently there's been water that's been discharging onto the carriageway. So there's been investigations looking at the potential source of that water, and these investigations will allow the design of remedial solutions to fix this problem along with the landslip. So next slide, please. So this next slide is a observational ground model. So this has been developed on the basis of the ground investigation information and all the information that was developed and obtained during the DEST study. So there's a number of key features to draw out from this. So this is a slice through the ground, effectively taken through the centre of the main landslip. You can see on the left-hand side, this is orientated to the south of the site, and you can see the limestone at the top of the slope. That was sort of Steve talked about on the earlier slide where we looked at the geology of the area. So that limestone overlies the Oxford clay, which you can see in green, and then the slope itself overlying that is the weathered Oxford clay. So this is where the material has been subject to historical weathering, and then above the weathered Oxford clay we have a mixture of sort of fill and solifluction deposits. So as has been mentioned, the development to the south of the B4069, there was evidence that materials have been imported to site and elevated above previous levels. So you can see the red line there shows the ground elevation based on 2020 EA LiDAR information. So that gives us an indication of the topography of the ground, both prior to the landslip and also prior to any import of material to the site on the south. Particularly in the area at the top of the slope, you can see that there have been significant increases in the elevation of the slope in that area, and then you can also see where there's been significant subsidence of the slope in the area of the landslip and bulging towards the toe where the slope and the road have been displaced down the slope. So another thing just to pull out about this particular slide, so as Steve mentioned as well earlier, the limestone, we've got the limestone at the top of the slope, and this is permeable, and obviously when rain falls on that area, it drains through the limestone, and then when it hits the Oxford clay, which is relatively impermeable compared to the limestone, that water can flow along that interface. And we've seen through both the ground investigation and site observations that we have shallow groundwater in this area, which is obviously can be an exacerbating factor in terms of landslides and slope instability. The final thing I want to highlight on this particular slide in the very small dashed red line is an existing slip surface which has been inferred on the basis of historical geomorphological mapping. So this area and the geology of this area is particularly prone to landslides, and mapping that was dated back from 1991, done as a study for Wiltshire at that time, indicated that there was potential evidence of geomorphological features which indicated maybe a historical landslide, and there's also evidence within the topography and the contours of the site that the area of the landslide was previously in a local depression, which again might be evidence of historical landslide activity. Next slide, please. So obviously it's absolutely critical in order to fix this problem and to reopen the road. It's very important that we understand the key factors affecting the landslide. Obviously to provide a suitable remediation solution, it is critical that that addresses all the underlying causes. So a couple of points to draw out on that. Obviously, the geology of the site is prone to landslides and ground movements. See, we've got shallow groundwater migrating from high areas to low areas, and that can exacerbate issues. Historical ground movement associated, both in recent history as well as sort of longer term, going back to the period, the glacial periods. Obviously, weather is very important, and increased rainfall and excessive rainfall, particularly during the wetter months of the year, can accelerate ground movements and lead to instability. And then finally, changes in topography or loading on the hill slope can obviously significantly impact the stability of the slope. So on the basis of all of this, it's clear that there's potential that some of these aspects will have triggered the landslip in 2020. So yeah, the location of the landslip in areas of historical slip surfaces, potential changes or local changes in groundwater, as well as changes to the loading on the slope and the addition of fill, is likely to have contributed to the triggering of this landslide in 2022. So as I mentioned earlier, we have monitoring installations installed within the slope that are giving us information in terms of the depth of the slip surface, which is critical to understanding the remediation solution as well, along with information on the groundwater, elevation of the groundwater, and how we can best manage that to develop a remedial scheme that fixes the problem.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's very helpful. And for me, the wording and what's in that final paragraph on the slide in front of us is crucial. The ground investigation works that have been undertaken have drawn us to the conclusion that we have got a very sensitive area here with regards to the stability of the hillside. And fundamentally, if we were to try and come up with a solution which just involved going in and building a road, whilst not being mindful of and trying to provide additional stability to the hillside, in essence, we wouldn't actually be solving the fundamental problem. So yeah, the ground investigation works have given us a lot of data, a lot of information, and that then has fed into our ability to start thinking about what the solutions for the site might be. That brings us on to the next section of our presentation, which is all about developing those thoughts for what a scheme may look like. To start this section, though, I just wanted to talk through this slide because we've got a very complex site here. The image on the right-hand side, what we've tried to do is split the site into distinct zones. We have zones A, B, and C, which are within the main slip area. A is the upper slope. B is the highway corridor where we want to build the road, and C is the lower slope area. And each of those three different zones have different characteristics and potentially require different solutions. But what we must do is we must ensure that whatever we choose for zone B, as an example for the road, is compatible with and works alongside the solution that we put in for zone A and zone C. If we don't get all of the areas working together as pieces of a jigsaw, we could end up with a situation where the overall solution isn't actually achieved. Not only have we got three different zones on the slip itself, as Chris was alluding to earlier, we do see some signs of carriageway problems to the west and indeed to the east of this site. So we've actually got 5 different areas that we need to think about, and in determining a solution, we need to be developing a comprehensive solution, and by its very nature, that will end up being quite complex. So, Chris, I think you're going to now move on to talk about the options development work that we've been undertaking, and specifically thinking about the core works that I think have to happen regardless, and then the potential options beyond that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So yes, as Steve mentioned, we've been working closely with Wiltshire over the last few months. Sorry, do you mind just going back one slide? Basically, with a completely blank slate at the start, looking at remedial solutions. and then gradually over a period we've narrowed that down, and what we've developed is effectively a sort of two-phased approach. So there are what we're terming sort of core works, which would underpin all of the different options that we've considered, so that this is common elements. So going back to the failure mechanisms of the landslip itself, obviously all the remedial works are targeted at trying to address some of the potential underlying causes. So firstly, changes to the slope topography. So post 2021, see material has been deposited on the upper slope. So we have this core earthworks which would seek to remove that material and re-establish elevation of the slope back to its pre-2020 levels. So that would underpin all the remedial options that you'll see on the slides ahead. So in addition to the core earthworks, there are core drainage works. So groundwater is absolutely critical in both driving slope instability, so controlling it is critical to reduce the risk of future landslides and slope instability. So what you see on this slide is some extensive drainage proposals to manage groundwater throughout the upper slope. So you can see a proposed crest ditch. So this is at the base of the limestone escarpment, which would collect any water in the upper slope to stop it infiltrating into the ground within the landslipped area itself. That then feeds a cascade, which would then connect into a proposed highway drainage system. So there is a small amount of existing carriageway drainage at the east of the site as it comes down the hill. So the proposal is to install a new carriageway drainage system that both connects to that existing carriageway drainage as well as runs through the landslipped area, picking up water from the upper slope as well as the carriageway itself, and then discharging that into the stream at the far west of this slide. So that's the head of the stream at the toe of the valley down there. So the carriageway drainage would propose to outfall into that stream there. And then finally, the final element is sort of additional proposed drainage within the lower slope. So it's important to try and control groundwater in this area as well. That helps stabilise the lower slope, which in turn benefits any remedial solution proposed for the road itself. Next slide, please. So as I said, those core works underpin all three of the options that we've looked at and assessed. So we've developed a number of options which we can then undertake an assessment process on, which Steve will come on to later. They've been developed in enough detail to try and understand, obviously, the relative advantages and disadvantages of each scheme. So there's both a plan and a section for each of the three options. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the three that we have looked at as part of our options assessment process. And in the top right hand corner, you'll see the estimated construction costs for each option. So option one was a excavate and replace. So it's a very simply speaking, this is a case of excavating the failed landslip material, removing it from site, and then importing engineered fill, compacting that in layers to establish a suitable platform on which to rebuild the road. And that includes sort of additional drainage measures to control any water that would find its way into this area. So you can move on to the next slide. Just this shows it in cross section. So you can see the sort of scale of the works required in this case. So the area shaded in blue is effectively excavated and replaced material, and with a drainage blanket at the base feeding a tow ditch. And that effectively removes the area of the slip and keys into the underlying deposits to provide a suitable platform on which to reconstruct the road. So I mean, you can see that the road itself forms a very small part of the overall remediation required, and obviously given the position of the road, you can see how extensive the required remediation solution is, both in the area upslope of the road and also downslope, which is obviously currently private land and outside of Wiltshire's direct control. So next slide, please. So the second option we've looked at is a soil stabilisation option. So this has some additional drainage in the upper slope to try and again provide further controls on groundwater above the landslipped area, and then the main sort of remediation part of this solution is mixing in a cement binder into the material on site as it is at the moment. So that cement binder strengthens and improves the properties of the ground that's currently on site. So if you move to the next slide, please. So this, as you see here, the area in purple is effectively improved ground. So the cement binder is mixed into the material that's currently on site, and that improves the strength. And you can see the profile of that material effectively keys into the slope below the existing failure plane, and stabilizes the slope accordingly. And then obviously some additional works associated with that as well. And then the final option is a piled retaining wall solution. So this is installing a contiguous board pile retaining wall on the downslope side of the carriageway, which stabilizes both the road and also the slope itself. In conjunction with that, some counterfort drains are proposed in the slope directly above the road. So these counterforts serve two functions. They both improve drainage in the slope itself, as well as improving the strength of the ground. Effectively, it's a dig and replace, but on a more localized scale. So they're basically gravel drains excavated into the slope, keying into the material below the existing shear surface. So if you could bring up the next slide. So again, you can see that this is involves substantial amount of work. Obviously, the board pile retaining wall is potentially sort of 10-15 meters deep, and may require sort of anchoring through the use of ground anchors to provide additional lateral restraint. So that stabilizes the slip by providing additional lateral restraint to the slope, and then obviously you've got the counterforts that help serve that purpose as well. So that's just a very brief summary, and you might have spotted obviously options 2 and options 3 came up with a capital cost that was around about £6 million construction cost to complete, compared to the construction cost to complete for the excavate and replace of over £12 million.
Thank you, Chris. That's useful. And I think on all of these cross sections, the one thing that jumps out at me is how relatively small the road element of these works are, and indeed how much access we're going to need to the adjacent landowners' areas. And actually, we are going to need to purchase some lands actually to bring forward some of these solutions. So there is going to need to be some land take to allow us to deliver these solutions. Having thought about what the possible options are, we then need to move on to actually what's the best solution overall, and what would we like to move forward with. I'm just struggling to bring up the next slide. Bear with me a second. I do apologise. There we go. So in order for us to think about which particular option would be the best, we need to think about various assessment criteria. We've had a couple of workshops between Wiltshire Council officers and Atkins, and we've thought about what the assessment criteria would be and how these individual options fare, what the relative pros or what the relative cons of each option are, and what the benefits and perhaps disbenefits are. These are the criteria that we've assessed against. Obviously, how we build it and the buildability of the scheme is an important factor. The upfront capital cost, but also, very importantly, the ongoing maintenance liability and therefore the whole life costs associated with these particular solutions. We've mentioned health and safety on several occasions already. Clearly, we need to be able to build these solutions. We need to be able to build them safely. And some of these are going to involve quite significant temporary works in terms of piling rafts and platforms. The environment and carbon issues. We mentioned some contaminated material. The excavate and replace option in particular would involve the movement of a huge amount of material off-site, disposal in landfill, and then the import of engineering type materials. So in terms of environmental impacts and the carbon impacts, that particular solution is not particularly favourable. We need to think about the programme and how long these solutions may take to come forward. And again, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, the land requirements, the land agreements that we are going to need with the adjacent landowners are a key factor as to which is our desired solution. Considering all of those different criteria, the best balanced solution that we have come up with is a combination of those core works that Chris was describing earlier, and option 3, the piled retaining wall solution. So in the top right hand image, you'll see there, this is the removal of that imported material that's actually loading the slope at the moment. The shaded area is the approximate area there that we think material needs to be removed from. We've then got this complex and drainage system, which effectively allows for the migration of groundwater from the limestone area to the south, down the slope, through the scheme, across the highway network, and then indeed into the streams and the ditches below. And then in terms of the building of the road, we are favouring that retained piled retaining wall solution, which involves 19 metres or so, 15-metre deep piles, which effectively support the new road on the hillside. Obviously, the exact details of this solution will need to be designed up, and you'll see the comment at the bottom that the final proposals will be subject to detailed design. So that's where we've got to thus far. We've done the ground investigations. We've thought about what's happened, why it's happened, what the factors are, what we need to think about in terms of a design solution, and we've developed our solutions. So how do we now go forward, and what are the next steps? We've developed this very sort of simplistic timeline. Top left-hand corner, you'll see there the landslip, the main event in February of last year, taking us through to the ground investigations, which were completed just prior to Christmas. The results of those ground investigations have fed through during the first few months of this year and have fed into the ground investigation reports that a lot of the outcome of that was described by Chris, and also the options assessment and options development work. That brings us now to the end of April. To move forward, we think that we've got a design effort. I mentioned it's a very complex scheme, so it's going to be quite an intense and difficult design process, but we believe that we can take that design forward through the next 2 quarters, so Q2 2023 through to Q4 2023. But there's no good us coming up with a design if we can't actually implement that design. So very much in parallel with that design effort, we need to be progressing with the development of the funding stream for these works, and indeed those legal and land access agreements that will need to be put in place to allow the scheme to come forward. So there's some fairly critical work that needs to happen alongside the design efforts for us to actually develop a scheme which we can come forward with. We believe that we'll be able to move forward to procurement towards the end of this year. This will be a complex scheme to build. There'll be a lot of different engineering activities happening within a relatively small site, and therefore ensuring we have the correct contractor for these works will be a key factor. So that procurement exercise will be particularly key. And we believe that we'll be able to move forward into construction in spring of 2024. A little caveat on that is that we may need to do some advanced works ahead of time, particularly if we think about site clearance and we think about bird nesting and we think about the use of the site as it is at the moment. We're coming very close to the end of our slides now, and I think there's just 2 more to go, or perhaps even just 1 more to go. I think, Jack, you've got a slide which is talking specifically about communications.
Thank you, Steve. Clearly, the landslip has been of significant interest both locally and regionally. So I just wanted to touch on what we're doing on the communications and how you can keep up to speed with what's going on with this scheme, essentially. So the first thing to mention is we've got a dedicated website, which is shown on the screen. You can also do a quick Google search for B4069 Lyneham Banks, which will take you to that website. So this website is regularly updated with how we're getting on, the current progress, a number of FAQs, which hopefully answer off the questions that anybody might have, and any crucial documents associated to the project. So we fully expect that the questions from this webinar will be uploaded to that website for anybody to see moving forward. We also issue a quarterly newsletter. So on the website, there is a link where you can sign up to that newsletter, which I would encourage anybody to do. We generally issue a newsletter every 3 months, again, with updates, progress on where we are, where we're going, and what we've achieved in the past 3 months. So if you'd like to receive that newsletter, please go onto the website and click on that link. We've also attended a number of local meetings with parish councils and area boards just to keep them up to date with what we're doing and how progress is both on site and in terms of the design. So we'll continue doing that moving forward to keep the local community up to speed. So if all of those options haven't been able to answer the questions, we've also got a dedicated email address, which is shown at the bottom of that screen. So anybody can email that address and we'll hopefully be able to find an answer to the question after you've exhausted all those other options. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. And if you are interested, please do sign up to that newsletter, have a look at the website, and we'll keep you up to speed. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Jack. That's very helpful. And I think that brings us to the end of our main slides. Obviously, myself, Jack, and Chris are here, David. So I think it's over to you now for the question and answer session.
Thank you very much. There's quite a few questions to get through, and obviously time is ticking on. So just to reiterate what Jack said, that any questions that were asked in advance or asked this evening will be answered in full and published on that web page, which I've also posted in the chat. So any that we don't get to tonight will be answered. So, but I'll start off with one about the consideration for an alternative route. So I think this one's probably for you, Steve. So please, can you explain why Wiltshire Council is considering spending millions of pounds repairing a road that is built across land that is inherently unstable? Surely the money will be better spent on an alternative route across stable ground.
Okay, David, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can understand why people would ask that question. I think the first thing I would say is it relates to the importance of the B road. It's a classified road. It's very important for connectivity within the local area. And as we heard earlier, we've got obviously local businesses and the like that potentially are suffering at the moment. Prior to the landslide taking place, I think our traffic figures were suggesting that there was about 5,500 vehicles a day during a weekday passing along the B road, 35,000 vehicles a week. So I think that provides a little context for the importance of the B road, both to the local community, but also within the wider Wiltshire area. Why rebuild the road and not build a new road? I think that there's probably two aspects to that. There's Wiltshire Council are the highway authority, and we actually have a duty to try and to maintain and manage the existing network, and we have statutory powers to do so. If we were to think about building an entirely new road, that would require a planning application. It probably will be several miles in length, so you can envisage that it would end up at some form of public inquiry. There would probably be the need to purchase land and some sort of CPO process. So you can see that the time and the difficulties of bringing forward a new route actually are far more difficult than maintaining and upkeeping an existing part of the highway. So I think it's a combination of the difficulties of delivering a new route and indeed the fact that because Wiltshire Council are the highway authority, we have statutory powers which allow us to go in there and actually start to replace the existing road.
Thank you very much. So we've had some similar ones, but that I think you've covered off there. So the next one is, when will the council repair the roads around Dauncey, which are now falling apart?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Dave. So yeah, the roads around Dauncey form part of that local road network that is receiving the brunt of that diverted traffic, unfortunately, in the local area. So a number of roads, including the roads around Dauncey, are on our radar, and we will be looking to bring forward some of those repairs over the next couple of months. It's probably just worth adding that Wiltshire Council, in its role as the Highway Authority, do inspect these roads on a regular interval, and obviously any defects that are picked up are programmed and repaired accordingly. So yes, we are aware of these roads, and we will be bringing forward repair shortly.
Thank you very much, Jack. So the next one is about timescales. It's why will it take from spring 23 to winter to 23 to put a design together? Does that time frame include agreeing the design?
Okay, David, I'll respond to that one. I think clearly the slides that we've seen this evening and the explanation that we've had from Chris regarding the complex nature of the scheme and the difficulties we've got in terms of the engineering solution. Fundamentally, this is a very complex scheme. It's going to be a difficult project to put together, and that is reflected in the sort of design duration that's been indicated. I think it would be fairly straightforward for us to design a road solution which is 90 meters long, 6-7 meters wide, with a verge on either side and a few signs. But if we were to do that, we would not be addressing the underlying fundamental risk and concern that's out there regarding the stability. So it's because of that, this is a very, very complex scheme, and hence it's going to take a long time for us to pull a design together.
Thank you very much. The next one is about Clackhill one-way breaches, and we've also had one question come in this evening along these lines. So I'll ask you them both, but they're quite similar. So the first one is: will repairs be made to the entire Lyneham Banks Road down to Clackhill, as well as Clackhill, given the poor state of those surfaces? Have any of the reported breaches of the one-way on Clackhill resulted in fines or mandated courses? And also tonight, are you planning to police Clackhill more, as people are ignoring the diversion and the state of the Clackhill is now dangerous?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I'll address the repairs first. Clearly, Clackhill is another one of those local roads which is taking far more traffic than it previously would have. So again, it's on our radar. We're hoping to get into Clackhill in the first week of May to undertake a number of those repairs. Clearly, we've already got a major road closed. Clackhill has taken a lot of that diverted traffic, so to now close another of those roads is just forcing the traffic elsewhere. So we're trying to do it at a quieter time of the year around the bank holidays to get in there and undertake those repairs that are clearly well needed now. On the enforcement front, Wiltshire Police are the enforcing body, and they're responsible for issuing enforcement fines, notices for anybody breaching the one-way condition on Clackhill. So we're working closely with Wiltshire Police. They have been out several times on that road enforcing the notice, and I'm pretty sure that fines have been issued to anybody breaching that. So we do work closely with them. We do speak to them regularly about how that's going on, and obviously they'll step up enforcement as and when needed.
Thank you very much. Now I want to move to another theme that's come up quite a lot, which is compensation for businesses. So this question is, I think, for you, Steve. It says, what compensation is now available to the affected businesses in Lyneham?
Okay, I think the first thing I would say, David, is really to reiterate some comments that Councillor Thomas made right at the beginning of this presentation. And clearly, Wiltshire Council recognise that this situation, which is not of Wiltshire Council's making, but this situation is having an impact upon the local community and local businesses. We've obviously done what we can from the highways perspective. Jack was telling us earlier how we've installed the sort of business as usual type signage where we can, and we are reacting to changes and for needs in terms of the traffic management. In terms of compensation, I'm not aware of any particular scheme. But I think that businesses are able, where businesses pay business rates, they are able to make an application to have their rateable value reassessed when there are sort of temporary situations such as this. So what I would suggest is if local businesses were to access the Wiltshire Council website, look specifically at the economic development section, I believe there's information on there which will help guide local businesses as to how they may be able to make an application for reduction in business rates. I think beyond that, I'm not aware of any other specific schemes.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I will just post that link to the business support in the chat shortly as well. The next question, and again, this is another one that's come up quite a bit, is planning consent. So the question is anyone going to take responsibility or be accountable for granting planning permission for the dwelling and allowing the removal of trees and the importation of millions of tons of soil on the bank by the van centre above the area of Buckled Road?
Okay, I think I ought to deal with that one, David. The question seems to sort of suggest that Wiltshire Council has provided consent that shouldn't have been given. I think the planning history of the site on the sort of uphill side of Lyneham Banks is people can go on Wiltshire Council's website, they can access the planning portal and they can see for themselves the applications that have come in and the consents that have been given. A planning application did come in, consent was given for the demolition of an existing building and the erection of a replacement building or series of buildings. That consent did not include for the deposition of building waste material on the hillside or wider earthworks associated with the scheme. And indeed, the works that have been undertaken on that site are not necessarily in accordance with the consent that has been provided. There is a subsequent application that's come in to vary the consent that was previously given. That is still under review. So I think that I would question whether the questioner. I don't think that anybody from Wiltshire Council side needs to take responsibility. I think that the planning situation is there for people to see.
Thank you very much, Steve. So now I'm going to come to a question that was asked this evening by Stephen Depler. He says, once the works have been completed and the road has been reopened in some time, will heavy or large lorries be excluded from using it to reduce wear and tear?
Okay, again, I can pass comment on that. Jack may wish to come in, but for me, I think at this stage, I don't think we are planning on making any changes to the weight restrictions along the B road, as I explained earlier on in the presentation. The B road is an important connection both for the local villages in the area, but also within the wider Wiltshire area. It is a B road, it's a classified road. So I don't think there would be any sort of immediate desire or move to changing the restrictions along the road. We would be looking to put back something that would operate on a like-for-like basis.
Thank you very much. And the next question is about what happens once the road is reinstated. It's what happens if more landslides occur in the slope below the new piled wall?
Okay, I think that's. I think that Chris, if we can bring you in there, because that's about this comprehensive type solution we're coming up with, I guess.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, clearly there is a future risk of landslides occurring in the lower slope, and it's something that we've given a lot of consideration to in the development of the proposals. Obviously, the piled retaining wall is a fairly robust solution, and will or various sort of design decisions and measures can be taken that ensure that the design of that retaining wall can account for a degree of material loss in front of the wall. But I guess the aim is to try and avoid that, which is where the drainage proposals come in, which is trying to control groundwater in that lower slope, and by reducing groundwater levels and reducing pore pressures, that should help to reduce the risk of future land instability in front of the wall. But it is certainly a consideration that we begin to all the options considered.
Thank you very much. And This is the last question we're going to take tonight, but as I say, we will put all questions and answers on the web page. So this question is, the cross section shows a possible slip surface. Does this mean the landslide depth has not been confirmed? If so, how can the preferred option be selected?
Yeah, probably another one
That's
for
you
me.
again, Chris,
So yeah, I mean, so we do inclinometers to look at ground movement, and specifically to try to determine the depth of the slip surface were installed towards the end of 2022. So that they've only been in place for about 3 to 4 months. So some of that data is starting to show clear depths of slip surfaces, but some of the inclinometers, the data as yet is sort of relatively inconclusive. But obviously over the coming months, as the design is developed, we'll establish further information on the depth of the slips, which will inform the detailed design. So that's an ongoing process at the moment, using the information that's coming back on a regular basis from the inclinometers installed.
Presumably, Chris, that historic slip surface that we've been looking at, that's very old. It could be sort of hundreds, thousands of years old, effectively.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the mapping that was done back in 1991 is looking just at geomorphological features. So there was no specific intrusive investigation at that stage, which categorically determined there had been a landslip in that area. But based on the evidence we've seen, it seems likely, and therefore it's likely that the recent landslip was possibly a reactivation of a historical landslip. I mean, we can't be too specific because we are, basing our on the evidence we can see. But certainly with the inclinometers we have installed now, so we have a number along the alignment of the landslip itself, we can establish a good idea as to what the current depth of that slip surface is, which will inform the remediation solution.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we got time for. So thank you all once again for taking the time out to join us this evening, and thanks for your questions and comments. We'll upload this webinar to YouTube, and it will be available on the project webpage in the next day or so. I posted a link to the project webpage in the chat, so you should get all the information you need there. I've also posted the business advice link in the chat. We'll post the written Q&A that covers all the questions asked this evening on that page in the coming days as well. And you can also sign up to the Lyneham Banks newsletter from this web page to receive updates about the scheme directly to your email inbox. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good evening.